From the Grace and Truth Bible, the explanation of the experts, one explanation of Genesis 1. This is a prologue not only to the book of Genesis, but for the Bible as a whole. And it is like a grand musical overture for the biblical symphony that will follow. It has its own introduction in verses 1 and 2, and then unfolds in a symmetrical 7-day sequence that corresponds to Israelite work week. 6 days of work followed by 1 day of rest. By working for 6 days and resting for one in worship, the Israelites imitate their Creator. The first 3 days match the second 3 in their form and content. God organizes what He created into a formal structure in days 1 to 3, and He fills it with content in days 4 to 6. A final day of rest caps the creation as the Creator delights in which He has made. The presence of God's Spirit at the beginning, the centrality of the spoken word, and the use of the divine plural before the creation of humanity signals the work of triune God. The main actor in the biblical story appears right at the beginning, God. The word God in verse 1 translates the Hebrew word Elohim, a title signifying the great Creator. God's act of creation in verse 1 brings into being the stuff of reality, which is formless and empty in verse 2. The rest of the prologue will show how the Creator completes the creation so that He can cease working on the 7th day. In Hebrew literature, the first word an individual speaks is indicative of his or her character. In His first recorded speech in Scripture, God dispels darkness with His command for the presence of light. Light is a central characteristic of God in the Bible. God speaks, and light appears effortlessly. What is more, He sees His creation and takes delight in it. It is good in that it serves its purpose to dispel darkness. The darkness is not good. God separates the light from the darkness and begins to name reality. Light is day, darkness is night. This naming will continue through the next 2 days. The word day can signify daylight or the alternation of day and night. Later, it describes an entire 7-day period. The second day is introduced by a divine command by which God separates water from water, with the sky described as a vault. This captures an ancient understanding of the world that envisioned the waters of the earth as separated from the waters above the earth by a giant dome. Unlike the gods of ancient Near Eastern myths, God does not form and separate parts of creation by fighting forces of chaos. He acts with an effortless spoken word. This is the only day God does not pronounce a verdict of goodness. On the 3rd day, God gives 2 divine commands. One that produces plant life from the dry ground. God is shaping the earth into a place for the habitation and sustenance of animal and human life. This day concludes God's creation of the structures of creation. In the next 3 days, He will fill these structures with content. After this day, God will no longer name the reality He makes. It will be up to humanity to continue the naming tasks. Of the 4th day, God creates lights to rule the light and the darkness of day 1. God creates lights to rule the light and the darkness of day one. The poetic structure of these verses resolves the tension of God creating light before He creates the sun and the stars. The second triad of these corresponds to the first triad. The fact that the astral bodies are unnamed downplays their mythological significance, since their names, sun, moon, represented gods in the worldview of Israel's neighbors. On the fifth day, God gives two divine commands. One, to populate the water and the sky, created on day 2, with marine and avian life, and another to bless the life with the ability to reproduce. In these verses, we also find the first word of blessing in the creation story, and its meaning is clear: to give life and not death, to enable animal life to flourish and prosper in the domain for which these animals were created. Fertility, pregnancy, reproduction, and the fulfillment of flourishing life are the prime indicators of blessing. The sixth day has two parts. First, God makes animals for the land, and second, God makes human beings. God first creates 3 classes of land animals: domestic animals, animals like reptiles and insects that creep on the ground, and wild animals. Then, for the first time, there is a pause in the action as God takes counsel with Himself. This pause signals the importance of the next creative act. God desires to create humanity in His own image and likeness. The use of the plural to describe God, our, is probably a reference to the Trinity, but it could also be a reference to the divine court, the angels. God creates both genders and His act in His image, with no hint of inequality between males and females. The words image and likeness connote both a unique relation to God. Humanity is like Him, and as unique relation to the rest of creation, humanity is to rule creation. Evidence from the ancient Near East shows us that ancient peoples erected statues of rulers to show the rulers' dominion over this area. While God has created a good world, it is a world that is wild and one that people need to tame and subdue and develop. They need to harness its energy, cultivate its plants, harvest its crops, and fill its spaces. Human work is a blessing and not a curse. It is a means by which God exercises His rule over the created order. With the final act of creation, God declared that all He had made was very good.